to the verse-by-verse study of the book of Proverbs. We shall finish chapter 3 today. Recall from last week, the chapter began with an elder speaking wisdom to a youth, which of course is God speaking wisdom to us. Let's start by listening in verse 19. By wisdom the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding he set the heavens in place. By his knowledge the watery depths were divided, and the clouds let drop the dew. Here we have wisdom, understanding, and knowledge all used interchangeably. God's wisdom is so foundational and is timeless. As it says here, his wisdom predates earth, because it was his wisdom that was used to create earth and life. Almost all scientists agree that the universe and life had a beginning and has a design and has order. The unanswered question is, how did it begin? How did the beginning begin? Was life created by chance, or was it by some greater power, a creator? It's interesting that actual surveys of scientists, over 52% of scientists surveyed believe there is a higher power. In fact, 76% of medical doctors believe in a creator. It seems that once you study the order, the beauty, and the complexity of life, it's difficult to believe that life is simply a random accident. One of America's greatest renowned scientists, a Dr. Francis Collins, who was the pioneer that mapped out DNA and has led the National Institute of Health under 3 different presidents, he said that God's creation is majestic, awesome, intricate, and beautiful. We have scripture that tells us God, he existed before anything else, and he holds all creation together. The God who made the world and everything in it, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. You know, we sometimes falsely believe that God's wisdom is not big enough for our problems, or he doesn't care. Yet one look at the magnificence of the heavens and the complexity and beauty of nature around us. It just tells us about how much he cares and the detail he cares, and reminds us that our God is so much smarter and so bigger than any of our problems. He's the one that wired us and understands us best. That's the message of the next 2 verses. Let's take a look beginning in verse 21. My son, do not let wisdom and understanding out of your sight. Preserve sound judgment and discretion. They will be life for you, an ornament of grace, an ornament to grace your neck. The author is encouraging us not to let God's wisdom out of our sight, which means not to forsake it, not to forego leaning on God's wisdom as we walk through life. We're to keep it close, literally around our necks. And if we do, there's a promise, a beautiful promise, which literally translates, it will give us life for our soul. As we saw last week in verses 2 and 8, God's wisdom yields both peace and prosperity, meaning a peaceful life that is vibrant, productive, confident, and purposeful. It gives nourishment to our souls and also light to our path. Let's take a look. His wisdom, his word is a light unto our paths, giving us direction to steer clear of the many potholes of life, as noted in the next verse. Then you will go on your way in safety, and your foot will not stumble. God always leads us to security and to peace. Let's take a look at starting at verse 24. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Have no fear of sudden disaster or the ruin that overtakes the wicked. For the Lord will be at your side and will keep your foot from being snared. You know, when we begin that day, we spend that day and choose to follow God's wisdom, his will. That night we'll sleep without regret, without guilt, without anxiety. When you and I trust in God, we are on a firm footing. No matter the challenges that come that day, we remain secure because God remains at our side. Unlike the wicked, we have God's fellowship and his guiding light. Now the remainder of this chapter 3 will be 5 more do nots. But each of these do nots are not to be restrictions, but are actually leads to freedom that leads to a blessed life. Let's take a look beginning in verse 27. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to act. This verse is speaking about justice and how you and I are to treat each other. He expands on this theme a bit more in the next verse. Let's take a look. Do not say to your neighbor, come back tomorrow and I'll give it to you, when you already have it with you. The teaching here is if you and I have an obligation, a debt, a payment for, say, a service, or even we owe a thank you or an apology is due, we're never to delay. To delay delays justice, which creates injustice. To delay, the author is telling us, is an act of selfishness. And it's a warning sign that our heart is not listening to God's wisdom. During this time this was written, it was common for practice for the wealthy to take advantage of the poor. Some things don't change. Whom they pridefully saw as inferior. The poor, like today, worked for the rich. But the rich very often would delay payment or refuse payment for their services. And the poor had no recourse but to accept this unjust treatment. So when Jesus came with this radical idea of rejecting this arrogant attitude and selfish behavior, he taught, as this verse is speaking about, we are to treat everyone, to treat all, no matter their station in life, as we wish to be treated. We are to treat others the way we want to be treated. And we are to love everyone, as we wish to be loved. The author continues, do not plot, meaning do not commit harm against your neighbor who lives trustfully near you. The message here is do not take advantage of someone that trusts you. To earn someone's trust is a precious gift and should be honored and protected and not abused. God's wisdom is telling us that trust breeds peace in any relationship. Next, the elder says, do not accuse anyone for no reason when they have done you no harm. If we want peace in our lives, we too must practice peace to others. Peace is actually a choice of following God's will. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. So what would be an example of not choosing peace? Road rage. That's a clear example of rejecting God's wisdom, and that choice never ends well. Next, the elder says, do not envy, meaning do not admire or focus on the violent. Violent here means those that choose might to get what they want, or choose any of their ways. For the Lord detests the perverse, the crooked, but takes the upright into his confidence. We are not to force our will on anyone. Sometimes we can have a fascination, maybe even a little admiration for the strong. We look at conquerors like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Genghis Khan, or even groups like the Mafia. We get captivated by their machoism and their accomplishments and begin to lose sight of the devastation that they cause. This was in part Napoleon's point when the winners write history books. What God is saying here is he calls us to be first a people of peace, so far as it depends on us. There are times when it doesn't depend on us. Okay, now he's going to address the wicked in the next final 3 verses of chapter 3. Let's take a look. The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the home of the righteous. He mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and oppressed. The wise inherit honor, but fools, those that reject his wisdom, get only shame. It's an important reminder here that our choices impact not only ourselves, but also the entire household. Those that follow God's wisdom are promised both honor and a blessed house. But those that choose to reject and mock God's wisdom will reap the consequences. That ends chapter 3. We'll begin chapter 4 next week. Until then, may God bless you and your family with both grace and peace. Aloha.